Can I introduce a colleague of mine from the NHS, Lena Samuels. Lena was also at our conference in Hampshire where we first met. Lena is also one of the very, very few BAME women that are chairs of the NHS, but also chair of an ICS, which I'll leave her to explain the acronym. So Lena, without further ado, over to yourself.
Hector, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It sounds like you've had a fantastic morning, so hopefully whatever reflections I provide won't be too repetitive. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my journey. I guess people, we always are interested in hearing what people do and how they do it, and definitely interested in hearing reflections from others as well, and receiving questions. So I am a North Londoner. It's where I was born, where I grew up, pretty much where I went to uni, and didn't really have a clue as to what I wanted to do. But it was one of those experiences where I think many people of colour share going to school and having some very odd questions that you get asked. And then, for example, when I was in the primary school playground, the question came to me, so do people where you come from live in trees? And I ran home and went, Mum, I was asked this question, what does it mean? And she was absolutely appalled, in terms of being asked a question where what that kind of illustrated, I guess, was a lack of understanding, a lack of education. And we know very well that limited understanding of broader history and peoples and what they do and what they're about. So I guess what I do at the moment, I am hugely privileged, as Jagtar was mentioned, to lead. I'm chair designate at the moment of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Integrated Care System. So some of you may have heard about the developments that are going on with regards to the NHS, which is about integrating conversations, integrating care. I always say people will think, well, nobody thinks the NHS is kind of, anything other than a single service. But those of us who are in it know that we work together, sometimes perfectly, sometimes not as perfectly, to provide care for an individual as holistically as we possibly can. But obviously, there's much more that we can do. I also chair South Central Ambulance Service, and I think perhaps that's the organisation I want to focus on in the main. When I arrived in the organisation, one of the things I was keen to do was, and it was part of the mandate, was to look at how we could refresh the values of the organisation, taking it from, I guess, what people tend to see it as, and it has been, and maybe this will resonate with colleagues in the fire service and also colleagues in policing, tend to sort of be a bit of a command and control environment because it is perceived as this uniformed service. But what we could see was happening is that it creates cultures that aren't necessarily the right ones for people and individuals to thrive, but also where you can embrace all of your talent, nurture that talent, and bring more diverse people to the fore and help them to progress. So we did a refresh of our values, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that wherever you spoke to somebody or engaged with somebody, they would be able to speak passionately about what it is that we're about. And our values are caring, teamwork, professionalism, and innovation. But it's interesting, those of you who know about foundation trusts, you have governors, a bit like you have, similar lay people who aren't necessarily experts in that particular field, and are kind of periphery to the organisation, but actually have a huge amount of influence. It was a discount. Some of we were within the organisation, and there our governors were sitting, and what they perceived us go on a development programme. And it was triggered by me starting off with wanting to share with our governors the same kind of training that we give to our staff by way of an induction on EDI, and then receiving the training, and then immediately afterwards, one of our governors leaning over and making a really inappropriate joke to me. And me, you know, when you get one of those moments where somebody says something and you think, hang on a minute, did I actually hear that in the way that I needed to? But recognizing that there was challenge there in terms of what I was trying to achieve, in terms of getting a really good culture going. And this challenge was coming in to say, actually, you can do these bits of training, but it's not going to change the way I want to be. So with the support and actually of the former Chief Fire Officer, Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service, who went off and started doing OD programs, he came and played a significant role in coaching us as an organisation to work through some of those issues and building trust between people, managing expectations and getting people to really begin to think hard about what does a holistic culture look like? What does an inclusive culture look like? I wanted to be the kind of organisation that wherever you broke that stick of rock, those same values were going to be flowing through. People, wherever you happen to be, will be able to connect with those and know that that was what we were driving for. But I think in order to do that, and I know the ticket on my kind of descriptor for this engagement session today is about leadership. And so for me, I think the only way that you can drive better cultures, better behaviours is through what I describe as compassionate leadership. Now, people think about compassion as being simply being kind, you know, being kind to the next person. But actually, I think it's something where you have to dig deeper. You have to, for me, think about, well, we talk about self-reflective practice. Now, that isn't just about getting to the end of the day and going, what did I do today? What decisions did I make? And where did that take me? Actually, it's a lot deeper than that, and it can be incredibly uncomfortable. And in order to be uncomfortable, you have to be able to create environments for uncomfortable conversations with yourself, with your colleagues, with your teams. And it needs to be in a safe environment so that people can transition from A to B. And I guess when the whole issue around George Floyd happened last year, as the leader within the ambulance service, I needed to make a statement and to communicate out to our organisation about what it meant to us and what it meant to our people and what it is that we stood for. And I did get some challenge back from individuals who, well, one individual who wrote to me and said, I don't come to work to talk about politics. And I think having the bedrock of the values base and having already signalled that what we wanted to do was to create a just culture, I was able to refer them back to our values and say, if we're going to live by our values, and it's absolutely consistent and right that what we do is we communicate what we think and feel about matters that have an impact on our people. And of course, it didn't write back. So I presume they either accepted it or decided they weren't going to take it any further. And I think the other thing, by way of my experience, having originally sort of trained in further higher education and kind of found my way by a variety of different routes into the jobs that I'm doing now in the NHS, is and colleagues who are people of colour here today may also find this. This may connect with them, I don't know, and I'll be interested in hearing, is that one is always expected to step into the room in whatever work environment or sometimes in a social environment to be the expert and to be the person who is going to be able to explain the whys and wherefores and how things can be changed and done. And also you're expected to be the person who makes the change, and forgetting that we're living in an environment with a series of structures that aren't necessarily enabling that to happen. So to me, that sometimes seems like it's a tiny bit perverse. But I only say this because when the George Floyd incident happened, I recognised that I had quite a limited knowledge and understanding of what it meant, what it felt to be a Black American man. So I went off and I needed to educate myself, and I read Black Boy by Richard Wright, and I read it. I started reading it on a Friday, I absolutely couldn't put it down. I read it over a weekend and it completely blew my mind. It was absolutely raw, but it gave me such a level of understanding that, it helped me also understand why I can't, as a woman of colour, always be an expert on how we can change the dial on some of these fundamental issues that break people, break our cultures, and don't necessarily get the best that we can and can achieve. But of course, in the roles that I do, I will always champion and always work hard to create the right culture that's going to lift our people up and enable us to bring our talent forward to thrive. So just a few reflections.
Okay, some really excellent reflections there. And I think we could encourage a conversation around those reflections. Reflections that in the world of the NHS, both myself and Lena experienced, where white board members were saying, I'm confused. I don't know how to react to the death of George Floyd. I don't know how to react to white privilege, white fragility. Help me. I was a bit taken back by that, because Lena, when she was a little bit confused about it, went off and read a book. There's a thing called Google. If you're not confused, you can Google and find out more. Why was it left to black members of the NHS to try to educate these people? And one analogy that I heard was, if these very same leaders had gone to the doctor and the doctor was saying, those pink spots you got on your nose, let me just explain what they mean. And then the doctor had to go to an emergency and ran off and said, I'll see you next week. What would they have done then? They'd have gone to Google, pink spots on my nose. What can I do about it? So I think a lot of the education, the experience should not always fall on you. It should there are ways that people can educate themselves. Delroy, during George Floyd, pointed me to some videos, some YouTube clips. Akala, wow, what a man. I listened to him on every walk. I lost 2 stone in going on my walks. It was a powerful, powerful invitation to listen to more. There is so much out there. The next thing you mentioned was the death of George Floyd and the impact it had on you and the impact it had on your board. So let's open that conversation up. Colleagues that I haven't spoken so far, maybe Melissa was talking earlier. What was the impact on you? Because clearly you felt disempowered. You didn't feel the power and support that maybe Jaspreet felt in My Trust, where we were openly talking about George Floyd. We're having let's talk sessions. So does anybody want to come in and talk about the impact of the death of George Floyd? I know that impact with Wayne and myself was, I'm tired. I'm tired. I didn't expect to be here again. The death of Stephen Lawrence was enough. We thought we'd change things. We thought we wouldn't have to have these conversations again.
I was going to add something in as well, Jagtar, because I think as I was going through that experience of working out what I was going to say and how I was going to write it, and I've got a really, really dear friend who is a police officer who I've known for a good period of time, and we've done a lot of work together, training internationally on human rights and what have you. But I think it was such a seminal moment, not just because of the nature in which he was killed, but also the kind of level of discussions that came out as a consequence. And I'd had to have some really tough discussions with this friend of mine who just didn't get it. And that was quite, it made me feel really vulnerable as well, because I felt like I was kind of trying to, have this conversation all by myself against a sway of, opinion where people just didn't get it. But what I then had to step back and understand is you can't be judgmental. You can't just say, why don't you get it? You've got to take the time out. So there is a bit where you've got to genuinely take the time out to some of those discussions and the logic, and helping people understand that because you don't see it or you don't feel it doesn't mean to say it doesn't happen. And you've got to be able to sort of help people appreciate that there needs to be an element of trust in coming to that understanding, and to trust the experience that people describe and talk about is so essential. And over a period of time and many iterative conversations that I had with this person,
So,
they then
Lena, does that
did
not
that research.
So, Lena, doesn't that chime with the earlier conversation this morning, the 60, 20, 80? So, you know, we engage with the people that want to listen to us, and there are those that will just never get it. We got a hand up from Erica. Also, I think Valerie, who commissioned this piece of work and wanted this to happen. I'm going to invite Valerie to come in as well and just give her reflections on the calls so far as well.
You're speaking about the impact of the George Floyd circumstance, unfortunate circumstance, and the impact that it had on me. I wasn't surprised. I'm a Black American, and we see this every day. What I felt, I was happy that it finally was videotaped. It wasn't somebody's word against the police's word. And there was bystanders there that could attest to the brutality of the whole situation. It made me feel sad as well that it had to go to that level of highlighting something in that regard in order to be heard. Because whenever we speak in America as Black and brown people.
Let me just stop you for a second. Just for a second. We too, in Bedford, had the death of a Black man who died once, first of all, restrained, and then thrown in a cell. But what was different about this, in my eyes, was the outcry from the white community, the allies. When you look at the marches following the death of George Floyd, the numbers compared to previous numbers of marches were predominant in the 60s and 70s. It was just Black. Here now we had a coalition of support from white allies. What else do you think was different for you?
Well, that's what I was coming to, that when I was saying that the Black and brown voices aren't heard, it was heard now due to we have allies coming in. Their voices gave it more prominence that something needed to happen, something needed to change. That came in, and that made a huge impact on the movement to help stop these situations from happening again. And finally, the police were held accountable for their actions. That was huge, because normally they're doing their duty. They were within force. And there's been laws and legislation that have been changed due to that one situation. So the impact was huge that I felt. And also my nephews, my brothers, my cousins, my Black and brown cousins, and the men in my family, we have to give them talks when they encounter the police. Those talks still occur. However, we feel better that something will happen if anything was to happen to my family members in that type of situation.
George Floyd's unfortunate murder, it was, when I saw that, I was crying. And I was crying to look at how anyone in this position of power discriminate. And I think it's a common theme of power and people who are helpless at that time, and how the discrimination takes place. And I was also feeling that people, when they saw the discrimination, they could relate to it, either as a person of color or as a Black person. When it's happening to you, you see that your colleagues or public don't respond. but because people could relate to it, that I saw at that time this happened. That's why they were more vitalized, because they have seen it so many times and they thought, okay, this is the time for me to take some action and go and raise my voice, that I've had enough looking at this and I want to be with you to say that this is injustice and I'm standing against that. So this is where the theme was: discrimination, people of power, and then how other people came as allies and they stood by it. And that's what means when Lena read that, I was also looking the videos and I was trying to understand what slavery is, what exactly happened. And I kind of try to educate myself, not as much as at the level, but I definitely read about it, what's going on about the slavery and all of that.
Jaspreet, thank you for confirming that self-education piece as well, and the impact on individuals and the impact of allies. Do not underestimate, colleagues, that every one of you will have had an impact on somebody that was working with you, or your family member, or people that you meet up in the pub or the golf course or the boxing club, because they know that you're allies of this struggle and they will have sought you out for experience. Valerie, any comment before I hand over to the next speaker? As it is you that commissioned it, it's only right that halfway through that you should comment on how you think this is going and give us any kind of nudges in any direction that you want us to go.
Anyway, thank you, AFSA, for organising this and for everybody for attending. I'm blown away by the quality of speakers that we've had, the interesting variety of subjects, by the level of debate. And by the way, Lena, I've ordered the last Black Boy that they've got in Amazon already while you were talking. So, because how can I know? You know, I'm a white middle-class woman living in the south of England that's not very diverse, and everybody's stories are just so amazingly interesting. And what else can I say? I'll rabbit on forever. It's been great, and I'm just so grateful for all of you for sharing your stories, and also the opportunity I've had to be able to sort of, I mean, Lena, I've met you a few times when I was working in policing and the odd NHS conference, etc., and worked closely with Ali Haydar in the past. And it's just been such a great experience to catch up with people and see how they're progressing in their careers and the amazing things they're doing. And to be fair, I think it's been quite an inspirational event, and that's as much as I'll say for now. It's been great. So thank you.